Hello friends. Today we are going to take a look at the Aqara FP300, a presence sensor with Thread and Zigbee interfaces that combines two technologies at once, passive PIR and an active 60 GHz microwave radar. Thanks to this setup, the sensor can run on batteries while not only responding to movement, but also maintaining presence detection for a person who is almost completely motionless. In addition, it also has illuminance, temperature, and humidity sensors. The main topic of the video will be how the FP300 works in Zigbee mode through Zigbee2MQTT, what settings are available, how the radar range limitation works, and how useful all of this is in real-world scenarios. We will carry out comparative tests in conditions that are as close to real use as possible and go through several interesting aspects of how it works. We will look at everything in more detail later, but for now, as usual, please give this video a like so that more people who are interested in smart homes can find it, and subscribe to my channel if you have not done so already. The Aqara FP300 comes in a small box, and two key features of the device are already highlighted on it: the combined operation of PIR and microwave radar, as well as support for two protocols, Thread and Zigbee. Let's take a look inside and go through everything in more detail. Most of the space in the box is, of course, occupied by the sensor itself. And here is everything that was inside. The Aqara FP300 on a magnetic base with an adjustable swivel arm, a manual, a metal plate, 3M double-sided tape, as well as mounting hardware with wall plugs. So the sensor can be installed in at least 3 different ways. The sensor itself is quite compact, 42 by 42 by 50 millimeters. There are 5 sensors inside: PIR, a 60 GHz microwave radar, as well as illuminance, temperature, and humidity sensors. The specified detection range is up to 6 meters with a 120-degree field of view. On the side, there is a control button and a code for the initial device connection. The mount itself allows you to adjust the sensor direction quite freely, which is especially important here. The area monitored by the FP300 will directly depend on its position. The front is almost completely covered by a translucent panel. Behind it are the two main presence sensors, PIR and the 60 GHz microwave radar, as well as the illuminance sensor. On the back there is a battery compartment. To open it, the sensor first needs to be removed from the base. Underneath it is the battery compartment cover, secured with a screw. Once the cover is removed, the battery module becomes visible. The design here is slightly more complicated than on regular Aqara sensors. You will also need a screwdriver to replace the batteries. The FP300 is powered by 2 CR2450 batteries. And for this kind of sensor set, the claimed battery life is quite impressive. Up to 3 years in Zigbee mode, and up to 2 years when working through Thread. The actual battery life, of course, will depend on the settings and how intensively the sensor is used. To get a better idea of its size, we can place 2 other familiar Aqara devices next to it. On the left is a regular PIR motion sensor, in the center is the FP1, and on the right is the FP300. In the end, it is noticeably more compact than the FP1, but still larger than a classic motion sensor. And thanks to the magnetic base, the FP300 can be installed directly on a metal surface without any mounting hardware at all. The swivel arm lets you immediately set the required direction and adjust the monitored area. By default, the FP300 works in Matter over Thread mode and can be connected to any compatible ecosystem, Apple Home, Google Home, or even directly to Home Assistant if there is a Thread border router on the network. But for permanent use, I still do not consider Thread to be the most predictable option, so in this review we will be using Zigbee. And now I will show you how to switch the FP300 from Thread to Zigbee. Since the FP300 is the global version, the Europe region is selected in Aqara Home. After the batteries are installed, the sensor automatically enters pairing mode, and if necessary, it can be started manually. Simply hold the button until the LED starts blinking. The smartphone detects the FP300 directly via Bluetooth, so no separate hub is required at this stage. In Aqara Home, the sensor is detected as a Matter device, after which the app offers a choice of protocol. Thread is used by default, but we need Zigbee, so we select it and confirm the switch. The app then downloads and installs the corresponding firmware. The process takes several minutes. At this point, the switch to Zigbee is essentially complete. Everything is done directly between the smartphone and the sensor. But as an experiment, I tried adding the FP300 to my Aqara M2 hub. The hub confirmed the device connection by voice, but the sensor never appeared in Aqara Home. The app displayed a region error, even though the FP300 is the global version and the European region was selected. The app offered to send a request to change the region, but I did not investigate it any further, since I am interested in using the device with Zigbee2MQTT. Connecting to Zigbee2MQTT is standard. Enable join mode and hold down the button on the sensor. Support is built in, with no external converters required. The FP300 is identified completely correctly as an end device, which makes sense for a battery-powered sensor. And there really are a lot of parameters and settings here. In addition to battery level and battery voltage, the final presence state and the PIR sensor state are shown separately. You can choose the detection method, PIR and microwave radar together, radar only, or PIR only, and also set the overall sensitivity. There is also a function for automatically identifying sources of interference, such as a fan or air conditioner. In addition, you can enable automatic sensitivity adaptation, configure the delay before switching to the no presence state, and set the PIR detection interval. The 3 additional sensors are also available here: illuminance, humidity, and temperature. Spatial learning is provided separately. The sensor can memorize stationary objects and permanent sources of interference in the room. For temperature and humidity, you can also control the measurement and data transmission frequency in quite a lot of detail. There are preset modes ranging from low to high frequency, or fully manual configuration of the measurement period, sending interval, and change threshold. The more often measurements are taken and data is sent, the higher the battery consumption. The illuminance sensor is configured in a similar way: measurement period, transmission interval, and the minimum change required for a new value to be sent. There is also a parameter for measuring the distance to the detected target. And one of the most interesting settings is the operating range of the microwave radar. The entire area from 0 to 6 meters is divided into 25 centimeter sections, each of which can be individually enabled or excluded from detection. This is not full room zoning like on the FP2, but rather a way to configure the detection range along the direction the sensor is facing. At the end of the list, there is also control over the LED indication, including the option to disable it on a schedule, as well as the standard Zigbee link quality indicator. Overall, Zigbee2MQTT provides access to practically everything needed to configure the FP300 for a specific room. And now for the most interesting part. Let's see how all of this works in practice. For the first practical test, I decided to compare the FP300 with a regular Aqara motion sensor. I placed both sensors next to each other, pointed them in the same direction, and left them overnight in the bedroom to see how they would respond to a sleeping person under identical conditions. And here is their activity history for the night. The bottom row is the regular PIR motion sensor, and as expected, it only responds to individual movement events. The top 2 rows are from the FP300, its PIR state separately, and the final occupancy state. You can clearly see that overall, the FP300 records more activity and maintains the presence state longer than a regular motion sensor. However, continuous presence detection throughout the entire night still did not happen. There were also intervals when occupancy was cleared. For the next test, I chose a scenario that is already as close as possible to normal real-world use. I installed both sensors, the FP300 and a regular Aqara motion sensor, above the entrance door and pointed them into the room. The sensors are facing my workspace. I specifically measured the straight line distance from the installation point to the desk with a tape measure. It came out to around 3 meters. So this is a completely normal working scenario. A person sits at a computer, moves slightly from time to time, occasionally gets up, and leaves the room. And here is the history of this test. Most of the time, I was in the room working on a laptop and moving as little as possible. At the same time, for testing purposes, I deliberately left the room several times to make sure that the FP300 did not get stuck in the present state. The graph clearly shows that during the entire time I was working at the desk, the presence sensor did not lose me even once, and when I left the room, it correctly cleared the state. The regular motion sensor, on the other hand, did not see a person sitting at the computer most of the time and only triggered on individual movements. There is practically no difference in detection speed either. Both sensors respond very quickly. The only exception is a strange episode closer to the end of the graph when the regular motion sensor triggered even though I definitely was not in the room at that moment, while the FP300, on the contrary, showed nothing. One of the most unusual features of the FP300 is the ability to configure the radar's operating range by individual sections. The entire detection area from 0 to 6 meters is divided into 25-centimeter intervals, and each one can be enabled or disabled separately. For this test, I disabled all zones beyond 2 meters. At the same time, the sensor itself was installed about 3 meters away from me and pointed directly at the workspace. In other words, in this configuration, it should no longer have been able to detect my presence. After changing the zones, you definitely need to press the apply button. But there is an important detail here. Since the sensor is battery-powered, it sleeps most of the time. So before applying the settings, you need to press the button on the FP300 itself to wake it up, and then check whether all the selected zones were actually saved. In my case, not everything was applied on the first attempt. After waking the sensor and pressing apply, 2 zones reverted back, so I had to disable them again and apply the settings once more. After limiting the range, I remained seated directly in front of the sensor, about 3 meters away from it. From time to time, I wave my hand to check how it responds. And here is the result. Immediately after disabling all zones beyond 2 meters, the presence sensor completely stopped seeing me as a target, which makes sense since I am about 3 meters away. At the same time, the PIR sensor, which is not affected by the range setting, continues to respond to individual hand movements. This clearly shows the difference between the two operating channels. Without confirmation from the radar, the FP300 no longer maintains the present state, while PIR works only like a regular motion sensor. And this graph shows a longer time interval. Here you can see that the presence sensor still does trigger. This is because I deliberately left the room and came back in to check how the device behaved after the zones were limited. So the FP300 continues to work normally. It simply now responds only within the permitted distance. One of the issues I found is that the entity that is supposed to show the distance to the detected target never worked for me. On the graph, the value remains at 0 throughout the entire day, even though the FP300 detected presence and movement many times during that period. Perhaps this will be fixed in future firmware versions or in Zigbee2MQTT support, but at the time of testing, distance measurement effectively does not work. We all know one of the characteristics of microwave radar sensors. They can work even through certain obstacles. But with battery-powered sensors, there is an important detail. Let me show you. First, I place the FP300 literally at arm's length from me. In this position, it detects and maintains presence without any problems. After that, I covered the sensor with a transparent plastic container. So there was now an obstacle between me and the FP300, but I continued to remain directly in front of it. While the radar was already active, the sensor continued to maintain presence even through the container. But after I left the zone, the presence state was cleared. When I came back and sat down in front of the sensor again, I was no longer detected. The reason is that the initial detection trigger comes from the PIR sensor, and only after that does the radar join in. PIR does not work through this kind of obstacle, so there was no new initial trigger. In other words, the FP300 cannot operate continuously from behind an obstacle, but if presence was detected beforehand, the radar can continue to maintain it through the obstacle for some time. The FP300 can not only detect presence, but also further adapt itself to a specific room. The AI interference source self-identification function is intended to recognize permanent sources of interference, such as a fan, air conditioner, or other moving objects. AI sensitivity adaptive allows the sensor to automatically adjust its sensitivity to the operating conditions. And spatial learning starts room learning. After the sensor is installed in its final position, it can memorize the permanent surroundings and react to them less as if they were presents. Two more important settings directly affect how the sensor behaves in real-world use. Absence delay timer sets the delay before the present state is cleared after a person leaves the detection zone. PIR detection interval sets the PIR sensor's detection interval. The shorter the interval, the more responsive it is, but the faster the batteries are drained. This makes it possible to find a balance between response speed, stable operation, and battery life. Overall, the Aqara FP300 is a good example of a battery-powered presence sensor that combines PIR and a 60 GHz microwave radar. This setup allows it to run autonomously on batteries, and it also includes illuminance, temperature, and humidity sensors. In Zigbee2MQTT, the FP300 is supported natively and can be configured in great detail, from sensitivity and the presence reset delay to selecting PIR/mmWave mode and limiting the operating range by individual sections. And the zone configuration in the test really did work exactly as it should. On the downside, target distance detection has not worked for me so far. There is also an important limitation of the battery-powered design. In combined mode, initial detection depends on PIR, after which the radar joins in. So it is not possible to fully use the FP300 behind an obstacle. Although once presence has already been detected, the radar can continue to maintain it through the obstacle for some time. That concludes this first look. I will keep the sensor in use, and if any new interesting features or scenarios appear, I will definitely come back to it. And if you have ideas about what else I should test on the FP300, write them in the comments. That's all for now. I hope the video was useful and interesting for you. I would appreciate your likes. They help promote the video on YouTube. If you do not want to miss new smart home reviews and tutorials, subscribe to the channel. You will find all the links mentioned, as well as my Telegram channels, social networks, and community groups in the description below the video. Thank you for watching. See you next time. Peace to everyone.